Dayambagam
Your individual I am is transformed into cosmic I am.
Who am I?
Who am I?
I am that.
I am that.
Go home, go home, go home, go home.
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 Who am I? Who am I?
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 Feel I and my Father are one.
Feel I and my Father are one.
I repeat in and out.
When you breathe in and out,
I repeat in I.
when you breathe in, feel I.
When you breathe out,
When you breathe out,
him.
am.
Feel. I am, I am, I am, I am.
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 1 minute feel you breathing.
1 minute feel through your breathing.
Close your eye.
Close your eyes.
I am that, I am that.
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 To hum, to hum, to hum, go hum.
Go hum, go hum, go hum, go hum.
Soham, 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 soham.
Soham, 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 soham.
Thasi. Satyam gavam dandalam, satyam devam dandalam.
Satyam Shivam Sundaram, Satyam Shivam Sundaram.
Satyam devam dandalam, satyam devam dandalam.
Satyam Shivam Sundaram, Satyam Shivam Sundaram.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam
Om Purnamada Purnamidam
Purnat Purnamudachyate
Purnamudachyate
Purnate Purnamadaye
Purnasya Purnamadaye
Purnamevavate Dade
Purnameva Vashishyate.
Thande Thande
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Om. Paramadam
Paramasukadam
Paramasukadam
Kevalam Jnanamutim
Kevalam Jnanamutim Dundvatitam Gandhyaridam
Nagara Sadrasam Tattvamasi Adilaksham Tattvasya Adilaksham
Tattamandhyaridatyam
Ekam Nityam
Ekam Nityam
Vimalam Achalam
Bhavadam Madadam
Sarasvati Sakshibhutam
Paradijadevudam
Bhavatitam Triguna-rahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami Sadgurum Tam Namami Om Shanti 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 This is the chanting of Atma Bodha, which means cognition of true self. What is our true nature? To experience that. Atma Bodho Vidhiyate Bodho Nisadhanebhyo hi Sakshan Mokshaika Sadhanam Pakasyavan Nibbanyānam Vina moksho na siddhati Aviroditaya karma Na vidyam vinivartaye Vidya vidyam nihante va Tejasti mera sangavad Parichinna iva jnana Tannase
Sati Kevala Tanmase Sati Kevala Soyam Prakashati Atma Meghapayen Sumaniva Bhagayan Sumaniva Ajnana Kalusam Jivam Ajnana Kalusam Jnanabhyasat Vinirmalam Jnanabhyasat Vinirmalam Kritva Jnanam Swayam Narshi Jalam Katikarenuvat Jalam Katikarenuvat
We should do that more.
Hey, who is Thai breed? I am that.
What life? Your total life. No? Today's topic is I am that.
Atma Bodha, I am. 68 Sanskrit verses on enlightenment by Shri Shankaracharya. Verse 1. This self-analysis is composed for those who have purified their hearts by tapaha, self-discipline, whose hearts abound in tranquility, whose minds are free from personal love and hatred, and the pairs of opposites, and who have intensive desire to experience Brahman as their own self. Verse 2. Cognition of the self, Brahman, is the direct cause of enlightenment and liberation from ignorance. All other causes are auxiliary, just as fire is the direct cause of cooking food, while all other causes are auxiliary. Verse 3. All good and virtuous actions are done, and should be done, for the purification of the mind, in which the full reflection of Brahman can be experienced. But all such actions cannot lead one to direct self-realization because they are not in conflict with ignorance. Only the knowledge of the self removes karmas, and ignorance, as light removes darkness. All virtuous actions must be done for the purification of the heart, but no one should understand or regard them as final cause of liberation. When the mind is purified by virtuous actions and universal services, then self is cognized directly by the light of the self. Verse 4. This self, the I principle, seems to be limited and tied by the individual name and form and body. The cause of this limitation and binding is ignorance of one's own real self. When by means of meditation ignorance is nullified, then the self-evident, self-existent self is cognized as omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, in the same way as the real nature of the sun is realized when clouds are removed from the path of the seer. Verse 5. Education is the collection of information, and it remains as the dual force in the meditator, because he must memorize such information frequently. But when this knowledge is transformed into experience, then the duality of this knowledge disappears, and experiential, pure consciousness shines forth in the same way as the natural purity of cloth after being cleaned with detergent. Here, self-discipline, devotion, and spiritual knowledge from the outside are like purifying substances to the mind. And when the mind is purified, pure consciousness is experienced vividly. Thus, learning and education are an indirect cause of knowledge, while true knowledge is the direct perception of reality. Shall I go on here?
That was 5.
That was 5.
Fine.
Go on. Verse 6. This sansara, the sense-perceived universe, is similar to the universe of dreams. Hate and love, pain and pleasure, subjects and objects of the dream world and the waking state are much alike. A dream is not realized as a dream so long as one is dreaming. Its dream quality is experienced only after one has awakened. Life is a waking dream. It may be called a cosmic dream. The dream quality of this waking life cannot be realized as long as one's real I is not awakened. Verse 7. This sense-perceived universe appears to be tangible and eternally real as long as the substratum, Brahman, pure consciousness, is not realized. In the same way, the appearance of silver in a shell of mother of pearl appears to be real as long as the true nature of that shell is not perceived. Verse 8. The basic and fundamental substratum of this universe is Lord Vishnu, the Omnipresent One, who is Sat, Chid, Ananda, eternal existence, consciousness, bliss. Names and forms of objects of the universe are superimposed on this omnipresent consciousness in the same way as names and forms of the various golden ornaments are superimposed on gold. Verse 9. As the all-pervading space seems to be diverse and distinct on account of its association with various objects which are different from one another, and as it becomes one space on the destruction of limitations, so the omnipresent self, the I principle, seems to be diverse and different in every body on account of its association with various bodies which are different from one another. And it becomes one on the destruction of the identities of these bodies. Verse 10. Birth, death, class, creed, gender, and nationality belong to the body. And since the self, I, is identified with the body, the characteristics of the body are superimposed on the self, in the same way as qualities of color and flavor are superimposed on water. Verse 11. The gross body is the product of the 5 great elements: solid, liquid, gas, light, and ether, and it is the result of previous karmas. The purpose of this body is to experience pain and pleasure, which are the result of one's karmas, and to experience relative knowledge, and by means of this body, to serve the universe as though serving the Supreme, and to experience the real form of one's own self. Verse 12. The subtle body consists of the 5 senses, the 5 classes of prana, manaha, mind, ahamkara, ego, buddhi, superego, and the 5 motor organs. The subtle body also is the product of the 5 elements in their subtle form. The purpose of the subtle body is to become the instrument for experiencing the subtle universe as in dream, imagination, and imaging, and to become free from the subtle imprints of karma in the mind. Verse 13. The causal body is the product of prakriti, maya. It operates during dreamless sleep, coma, and death. The purpose of this body is to bring the mind into the state of prakriti, thoughtlessness. These 3 bodies, gross, subtle, and causal, are called the upadhis, limitation, and they belong to the ego. The real self, I, is beyond these 3 bodies. Verse 14. In addition to the limitations of the 3 bodies, there are 5 limiting sheaths. The sheaths of matter, energy, consciousness, intelligence, and bliss. All 5 sheaths are the product of cosmic energy. Pure consciousness, in association with these 5 sheaths, appears to be identified with them, as a crystal appears to be endowed with the color of the cloth with which it is in contact. Verse 15. The self, the I, is apparently identified with the 3 bodies and the 5 sheaths. Through investigation of the self, who am I, one should discriminate and separate the pure and inmost self, the I, from all 3 bodies and 5 sheaths with which it is identified, in the same way as one separates a grain of rice from its husk without damaging it. Verse 16. The self, the I, is all-pervading, but it is not cognized in everything. It is cognized only in buddhi, intelligence, as a reflection is seen clearly only in a mirror, although it is falling equally on every object. Verse 17. Know for certain that Atman, I, transcends the body, senses, mind, buddhi, and prakriti. It is the witness of their functions. Like a king, it is their ruler and controller. The self pervades and interpenetrates the body, sense organs, mind, ego, and superego. Yet it remains totally different from them because it is the eternal subject and unchanging consciousness. Verse 18. According to the condition of body, mind, and senses, the self, I, appears to be either happy or unhappy, restless or tranquil, healthy or unhealthy, in the same way as the moon appears to be moving when clouds move across its path in the sky. The cause of the identity of I with the body, mind, and senses is ignorance of one's real nature. In its real nature, the self is pure consciousness and is eternally unqualified with the characteristics of body, mind, and senses. Verse 19. The body, senses, mind, ego, and superego operate in their respective functions because of the presence of the self, I consciousness. Just as men work in their respective fields in the presence of the light of the sun. Verse 20. Because of ignorance of the real self, one identifies the self with the body, mind, and senses, and their activities are superimposed on the I, which is pure. The superimposition of the body on Atman, I, is similar to superimposition of blueness and concavity on the sky. Verse 21. Because of ignorance of the real nature of the self, the functions of the body, mind, and senses are identified as those of the self, and the condition of the body, mind, and senses are attributed to the self, just as the movement of the moon's reflection in a river or the ocean is attributed to the moon instead of to the water. Verse 22. Attachment, detachment, love, hatred, pain, and pleasure are the product of mind stuff. They are born with the mind, they grow with the mind, and they disappear when the mind stuff disappears, as in dreamless sleep. Therefore, they belong to mind stuff and not to Atman, self, which is immanent, transcendent, and all-pervading. Verse 23. As the nature of the sun is light, the nature of water is liquidity and coolness, and the nature of fire is heat. So the real nature of the self is eternal existence, consciousness, bliss. Verse 24. In the relative world, the thought, I know, is produced by the union of modifications of the mind stuff with two aspects of the self, namely existence and consciousness. This union is the product of non-discrimination between the self and not self. Verse 25. The self, I, never undergoes change, but mind stuff never remains changeless. Atman is consciousness, but mind stuff is never endowed with consciousness. The consciousness in mind stuff is nothing but a reflection of the self. The individual self, because of ignorance of this reflection, feels the self to be identical with the body and mind stuff, and believes himself to be the seer and knower. Verse 26. As in semi-darkness, a rope may be mistaken for a serpent, likewise, due to ignorance, this self, I, is understood to be the body. As in proper light, the true form of the rope is realized, and the fear of a serpent disappears. So, in true cognition of the self of the individual is realized as identical with the universal self. On this realization, one's fear of birth and death disappears. Verse 27. As the sun alone illumines all planets, but by them the sun cannot be illumined, so it is the self that reveals all activities of the body, mind, and senses. But by the activities of the inert body, mind, and senses, the self cannot be revealed. Verse 28. Consciousness is self-evident and self-existent. It does not need another consciousness to cognize its own consciousness, just as a lighted lamp reveals itself, and there is no need of another light to see the lamp. Verse 29. I am neither body, senses, mind, ego, superego nor prakriti. By rejecting all limitations and superimpositions of not-self on the self, know for certain the oneness of the individual self with the universal self by means of the great Vedic aphorisms. The Vedic aphorisms are as follows. Number 1, thou art that. Number 2, this Atman is Brahman. Number 3, consciousness is Brahman. Number 4, I am Brahman. Verse 30. The body, mind, and senses, and all limitations are the product of ignorance. They are of the nature of an object and are perishable like bubbles. Know for certain that yourself, I, is completely different from perishable objects and is absolutely identical with the universal self. Verse 31. Since the self is beyond the body, mind, and senses, I am free from birth, old age, emaciation, sickness, suffering, and death, because these belong to the body and are part of the not-self. Since I transcends all senses and sense organs, they cannot involve the self, I. And they cannot produce any change in the self. Verse 32. Pain and pleasure, love and hatred belong to the mind. Since I am is beyond the mind, these cannot produce any change in me. The Vedas declare that the self is beyond cosmic energy, beyond mind. It is pure and self-luminous. Verse 33. From the self are manifested cosmic energy, mind, all senses, solid, liquid, gas, light, and ether, and the various universes. Self, Brahman, maintains and supports all beings. Verse 34. I, Brahman, am beyond Satoguna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna, free from all change, eternal, pure, beyond birth and death, formless and nameless, and one with the universal self. Verse 35. I, Brahman, pervade the total universe, inside and out, like Akasha, ether. I am changeless and the same in all. I am equal to all, stainless, immutable, and unattached. Verse 36. There is no difference between myself, I, and the universal I, Brahman, who is eternal, pure, free, and who is one, indivisible, non-dual, and who is of the nature of Satya, truth, Jnana, knowledge, Ananta, infinity. Verse 37. Thus, by constant and continuous investigation of the self, who am I, it is experienced that myself, I, and the universal self are eternally united. Experiencing the union and identity of the individual self with the universal self destroys ignorance and distractions as proper medical treatment removes disease. Verse 38. In the quest of self, one should conduct his investigation in a solitary place, freeing the mind from all thoughts and withholding the senses from all objects. One should meditate with undivided attention on the infinite Atman, which is one without a second, as his own self. Verse 39. The wise seeker carefully investigates his self, keeping his mind free from all thoughts. Thus, he will find that every object of the universe is melting into consciousness. Experience Atman present everywhere like ether, the colorless, formless atmosphere. Verse 40. Thus, investigating the nature of the self, the I, deeper and deeper, the universe of the senses is experienced as nothing but sensation, and sensation is experienced as nothing but the vibration of matter and energy. Going further into deeper analysis of the self, the I, the seeker experiences the entire universe as the radiation of pure consciousness, I, and he dwells as the embodiment of infinite consciousness and bliss. Verse 41. Knowledge of the relative universe depends on the trinity of the knower, the means of knowledge, and the knowable. But in the state of pure consciousness, there is no such distinction. The Supreme Self is pure bliss, and it shines alone. Verse 42. By constant and continuous investigation of the self, cognition of the real I is kindled, and this fire of self reduces all karma and ignorance to ashes. Self-investigation, meditation, is like rubbing two sticks of wood together to kindle fire. By the friction of individual self against the universal self, the fire of knowledge is kindled. Verse 43. As the sun appears following extinction of darkness by dawn, so the cognition of the self is experienced after the destruction of ignorance by knowledge. Verse 44. The self is an ever-present reality, and everyone expresses himself by means of his self alone. Everyone knows his self as I, yet because of ignorance of the nature of the self, it is not cognized. When ignorance is destroyed, this I is realized as ever united with the cosmic I. The discovery of the ever-present Atman is like the discovery of a necklace hanging about a woman's neck, while she is searching everywhere else for it. Verse 45. The universal self appears to be individual self only because of ignorance. Just as in darkness and ignorance, one might mistake the stump of a tree for a man. When the real nature of the I is cognized, the false concept of separateness of the individual soul disappears along with name and form. Verse 46. In the presence of knowledge arising from the realization of the true nature of self, ignorance and the products of ignorance, such as me and mine, are immediately destroyed, just as disorientation disappears in the face of the sun. Verse 47. The yogi, endowed with realization of the true nature of the self, experiences, through the eye of wisdom, the entire universe in his own self, and he regards everything as pervaded and manifested by the self, which is one without a second. Verse 48. This entire universe is nothing but Atman. Whatever is perceived and sensed is not other than Atman. As pots and jars of clay are verily clay, and cannot be anything other than clay, so to the enlightened, all that is perceived is nothing but Atman, which is the ultimate cause of the universe. Verse 49. Ajiva Mukta, endowed with the knowledge of Atman, becomes free from the limitations of the body, mind, and senses. Hence, he forsakes their attachment. He is identified with pure consciousness, whose nature is existence, knowledge, bliss. He verily becomes Brahman as a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. Verse 50. A self-realized yogi, after crossing the ocean of ignorance and killing the demons of material love and hatred and pain and pleasure, obtains tranquility and is established permanently in the Absolute Self. Verse 51. He relinquishes attachment to material happiness, which is transient and illusory. He experiences the eternal bliss and peace of Atman and shines inside and outside this body through the senses and mind as a lamp placed in a jar with many holes. Verse 52. He remains free from the changes of the body, mind, and senses, although he operates through them. A self-realized man has the nature of contemplation. He works through his body and mind and relativity, but he is identified with his real I. He is uncorrupted by the defects of the body, mind, and senses, just as the sky is not flawed by the defects of objects. A self-realized yogi remains unaltered under all conditions. He moves freely like air, and he remains unattached like space. He examines everything as a witness. Verse 53. On the destruction of identity of the self as the body, the yogi becomes free from the limitations of body, mind, and senses. And the association with this body is established with the matter of the universe. As the water of a river becomes one with the water of the ocean, as limited space becomes one with cosmic space on the destruction of limitations, and as light of low intensity becomes one with the light of greater intensity, so the matter and energy of his body become one with the matter and energy of the universe, and his self, pure consciousness, I, becomes one with the universal self. Verse 54. What is Brahman? I, the self. Brahman is that by attainment of which nothing is left to be attained. Brahman is that bliss by experiencing which no bliss is left to be experienced. Brahman is that knowledge by knowing which nothing is left to be known. Verse 55. Who am I? What is Brahman? Know certainly that to be Brahman. Verse 55. Who am I? What is Brahman? Know certainly that to be Brahman, by experiencing which nothing is left to be experienced. When Brahman is seen, nothing more is left to be seen. When identity of this individual self once is born in Brahman consciousness, it does not need to be born again in the world of relativity. Brahman is that knowable reality by realizing which no object of the universe is left to be known. Verse 56. Brahman, the I, is that which fills the total universe in every dimension, and that which is existence, consciousness, bliss, which is one without a second. And that is Brahman, the self of every being in the form of I. Verse 57. Know to be Brahman that which is indicated by the Vedas and Vedanta as not this, not this. Know to be Brahman that which is non-dual, indivisible, one and blissful, and the substratum of the entire universe. Verse 58. Know to be Brahman that by experiencing which bliss in integrity is experienced. Deities such as Brahma taste a particle of that unlimited bliss of Brahman. Verse 59. Every object of the universe is pervaded by Brahman. All transactions of the body, mind, and senses are possible because of Brahman. Therefore, Brahman permeates everything as butter permeates mild. Verse 60. Know for certain to be Brahman that which is subtler than the subtle, and greater than the great, neither subtle nor gross, neither long or short, without birth and death, without change, without form, qualities or color. Verse 61. Experience to be Brahman that by the light of which luminous bodies such as stars, sun, and moon are illumined. Know to be Brahman that which cannot be illumined by their lights. The universe of the body, mind, and senses is illumined by consciousness alone. Verse 62. It is the Supreme, Brahman alone, that pervades the entire universe in every dimension and shines of itself. The individual self, when identified with Brahman, begins to shine like Brahman in the same way as an iron ball placed in a fire, inwardly and outwardly begins to glow like fire. Verse 63. Brahman is transcendental reality, and the relative universe in all its aspects is nothing but a manifestation of Brahman. Brahman is independent of the character of the universe. Nothing exists in the universe which is not in Brahman and from Brahman. If any object of the universe appears to exist independent of consciousness, Brahman, it is as unreal as a mirage. Verse 64. Whatever is sensed, perceived, and experienced is nothing but the manifestation of Brahman. The self seems to be divided in and among all, while in essence it is indivisible, eternal existence, knowledge, bliss, and it is the I, Brahman. Verse 65. The self-realized man experiences existence, consciousness, bliss, everywhere and in every object of the universe, but the ignorant man does not experience the presence of Brahman, just as the blind man does not perceive the shining sun. Verse 66. By hearing, thinking, and meditating, the light of the self is kindled. Once this light of self is kindled, the individual I, individual self, becomes free from all impurities and begins to shine forth as the universal I, in the same way as gold shines forth when it is purified by fire. Verse 67. Brahman shines as I in the heart of every being. When the identity of the individual I as the universal I in one's heart is awakened, it is experienced as the sun of knowledge, which destroys the darkness of ignorance. Atman, Brahman, pervades all, sustains all, reveals the universe of the senses, and also reveals itself. Verse 68. By renouncing all ulterior motives and selfish activities, he who in the temple of his heart worships that Brahman, I, which is independent of time and space, cause and effect, which is omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent, which is the destroyer of the pairs of opposites such as love and hatred, pain and pleasure, heat and cold, and which is the giver of eternal happiness. he becomes all-knowing and all-pervading, and attains immortality here in this very life.
Om Dad.
दिग्देशकालाद्दिनपेक्ष्य सर्वगम् दिग्देशकालाद्दिनपेक्ष्य सर्वगम् सीतादिहन्नेत्य सुखं निरञ्जनम् यस्वात्मतीर्थं भजते विनिष्क्रियः स सर्वगतो मृतो भवेत्. This is the completion of self-knowledge, Atma Bodha, composed by Bhagavan Shri Shankaracharya. It contains the word philosophy within 68 mantras. Nothing is left out. A complete Bible of mysticism. Close your eyes and meditate, experience